Hi guys, today I'm here with my favourite books of 2018 so far video. I love filming this video. I love looking back at the end of the year to see which books are still on the list. Last year, the books that I featured at this time last year were still the same at the end of the year, and I have a feeling that that's going to be similar again this year. My reading tastes so far this year have been very varied, which is why I've got a few more books than usual on this pile. I've been reading lots of different books, lots of classics, lots of YA, lots of adult books, some non-fiction too, so that does make it very difficult to narrow it down to a certain number of books. So I just chose the ones that really stuck out to me, and I am really looking forward to talking about them with you. So the first book that I want to talk to you about today is one that I read right at the start of the year in January, and it has remained my favourite book of the year so far. I think this is my favourite book, even though I love all of these. I think this one might just beat the rest slightly, and it is The Woodlanders by Thomas Hardy. I love Thomas Hardy. As you know, I recently filmed a Where to Start with Thomas Hardy video as part of my classic series, so if you want to find out more about the rest of his books that I've read, then you can go and watch that. But The Woodlanders is the Thomas Hardy book that I started the year off with, and I just loved it. It was the perfect combination of Thomas Hardy comedy with a bit of tragedy too that completely destroyed my heart, and also just this very natural imagery that I've come to love in his writing. This is set in a woodland community in Thomas Hardy's fictional county of Wessex, which is part of Dorset, little bit of Somerset, occasionally some of Hampshire too, and a slither of Wiltshire. It is basically this part of the southwest, and Hardy really does bring it to life, and he knows exactly what he's writing about. And I love the community, I love the characters. It's about a girl called Grace who goes away to school, then comes back, and she doesn't really fit in anymore. She's been betrothed to this man called Giles, and they don't really fit in with each other anymore. They lead very different lives, and it's about their relationship and Grace's relationship with another man, and at times there are some really dark themes, but on the other hand it's got a very heartwarming, uplifting feel. So I love the balance of that, and I found that this is the most similar to Far From the Madding Crowd so far, which I think is my favourite of Thomas Hardy's books, even though that is a very difficult thing to choose. But I found that this one was similar. It was similar in plot, kind of similar in tone, and I just loved it and can't wait to read more Thomas Hardy books this year. I've got 2 more that I want to read, so I'm really looking forward to that. The only way I can describe one of the genres I've been really loving this year is literary historical fiction. Not straight historical fiction like your typical Philippa Gregory books, but historical fiction that is set in the past, obviously, but has this literary feel to it and is a lot more than just historical fiction. And one of the books that most surprised me this year, and I'm so pleased that I loved, was The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. I recently went to a talk that she did at the Bath Festival, and it was so fascinating and just reaffirmed my love for her writing. This is the only book of hers I've read so far. I do have her debut novel, and I'm really looking forward to her next book, Melmoth, but I did fall head over heels in love with this, and I would really recommend it, especially if you love classics, because one of the best things I found about this book was that even though it is set in the Victorian period, it's not your typical Victorian novel, because she is allowed to talk about things that maybe wouldn't have been accepted then, and it's a very progressive look at Victorian society, when usually how we view Victorian society is as this a very strict, rigid thing. But Sarah Perry really does change our image of what Victorian society could be like, and I loved that about it. It's an intelligent and beautifully written tale, and one that I'm sure I'm going to be rereading soon because I couldn't get enough of it, and I feel like when I read it again I'm going to get so much more out of it. Even though I did get lots out the first time, it's a book that you can read again and again and again and you won't get bored of it. And then a similar book in style that I read because I heard that it was compared to The Essex Serpent was The Mermaid Mrs Hancock book by Imogen Hermes Gower, which again I fell head over heels in love with, but I didn't think it was too similar in style with the Essex Serpent that I was constantly comparing the two, but I feel like because I read them so close together, they really complemented each other and made me want to read more books like this. This is set in Georgian society, and I'm very used to reading Victorian novels, so it was really nice to read something set slightly earlier. And again, like the Essex Serpent, I loved this modern look at Georgian society, how it changes our perceptions of what society was like back then, and it is a story of prostitutes and really bad things happening, and also at the same time it is heartwarming, and I really fell for the characters. I loved them. The main characters in this are Jonah Hancock, who is a merchant and whose boat gets sold for a mermaid, which is this creature that has been sewn together. I think it was a fishtail and a monkey, and they were very popular sights in Georgian society. People would go and pay to see these wonders. And the other main character is Angelica, and she is a prostitute. She is not the most likeable of characters, but that's why I loved her so much, and I loved their relationship. As the book progresses, I loved how their character arcs joined together and made this wonderful story, and I can't wait to see what she writes next. This has been nominated for quite a few prizes too, which I'm really pleased to see, and for a debut novel I thought that it was spectacular, so I'd really recommend this, especially if you like reading classics. Both of these books I think that you will love. An author I have been raving about recently, and I'm sure none of you are surprised to see included, is Daphne du Maurier. I love her. She is one of my new favourite authors, and I've read 2 of her books so far this year, and I'm sure I'm going to read lots more in the rest of the year because I love her. I am so obsessed with her writing, and she is the best. And the 2 novels I have read this year are Rebecca and Jamaica Inn, and I love them. I just love them with all my heart. I'm so enthusiastic about them. I want to talk about them lots and lots, and I'm so pleased that I have read her books this year. So I started off with Rebecca, and it was the most thrilling ride with a main character who doesn't have a name and is haunted by her husband's ex-wife who has tragically died in a freak accident. But it gets a lot darker than that. There is also the mysterious Mrs Danvers, who is a very chilling character who sets the hairs on your arms up as you read about her, and you're not sure who is the hero and who is the villain. It is a story of morals and what is morally correct and who the hero of the story is. I would argue that actually the main character in Rebecca is a bit of an anti-hero. She makes a few wrong decisions, her judgment isn't always right, and how she reacts to certain situations in the book mean that I'm not sure if she is a hero at all, but I loved her for it. And I also loved Maxim. He is a very flawed character. She does write her characters brilliantly, and at the same time her characters are set in this wonderful writing that brings the setting to life vividly. I could smell the rhododendron as I read Rebecca, and you could feel the heat of the Cornwall summer building, and it reminded me of the scene in The Great Gatsby when they're all in the hotel room and it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter as this heat wave sets in, and I felt like that was the overall tone of Rebecca, which I loved. I just want everybody to read this, and this year is the 80th anniversary, so it's the perfect time to pick it up. And then, like I mentioned, the other Daphne du Maurier book I read was Jamaica Inn. This was pretty similar to Rebecca, but has lots of differences, which meant that I got everything I loved about Daphne du Maurier, but a very different story, and again, a main character that I loved. This is also set in Cornwall, and it is the opposite to Rebecca, where Rebecca is a very hot book. This is set on Bodmin Moor, and is a very gothic setting, and I loved reading about the smuggling and how dark it turned, and how there's a bit of a mystery too. You're not sure again who is a hero or who is a villain, but amongst that the main character Mary really stands out and really drives the story forward. And it put me in a reading slump after I read it because I just couldn't find anything that was as good as this, which is what I've got to be careful of when I read her books, because they are so good that nothing else can compare. compare. And I love her writing because it does remind me of the Brontes, who of course I love, and she also loved the Brontes when she was alive. She did a biography of Branwell Bronte, and I found that both of these books can be comparable to the Brontes. I would say that Jane Eyre is most similar to Rebecca, and Wuthering Heights is most similar to Jamaica Inn, and I'm looking forward to seeing if I can find any more of her books that compare to the Brontes. Because I've got so very few Bronte books left to read, which breaks my heart, it's really nice to find a new author, or a new to me author, that I can read and get a similar reading experience. So I love it, and I anticipate reading lots more of her books this year. Another book that I read and loved this year was The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Schaffer and Annie Barrows, and this book spoke to my book lover heart. It was the perfect book to read because it is about books. It is an epistolary novel, which means that it's told in letter form, which I loved. I loved all of the characters, I loved the insight into their lives and their inner lives too, because I think there's something very personal about a letter and how it's a very intimate form of writing, which really added to the book. This is set on the island of Guernsey just after the Second World War has ended, because Guernsey was Nazi occupied, and so it tells the story of the islanders during that time and after too, as they try to rebuild their lives. And the book is joined together by the main character Juliet, who talks to the islanders, who sends them letters and then goes to Guernsey to find out about what happened, because she's writing a book and an article about it. She is a writer, which I loved. I loved reading a book about a writer, and I just thought that this was so charming and wonderful with an emotional twist, and it was everything I could have hoped for and more, and I'm really looking forward to watching the film soon. And then the final book I want to talk to you about is I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman, which is my favourite YA book of the year so far, and I can't really see that changing. It's going to take a lot to knock this off its perch because I completely fell in love with it. I fall in love with all of these books I keep mentioning, but this was a particularly wonderful book, and I just want everybody to read it. She is one of my favourite YA authors, and I've been waiting for this book for so long, ever since I first heard about it. I've read all of her other books. I follow along with her webcomic called Heartstopper, which I love, and I thought that this was such an observant, such a realistic tale about fandom culture and what it means to love a boy band and what it means to be on the other side receiving that love. And when the two collide, things can get very confusing. Alice has got such a dedicated following, and she's an author I really admire, so I really would recommend that you read this if you're looking for something that really does explore the human condition and what it means to be a teenager, what it means to be in love with something, and what it means to be in love with a person when you don't really know them. So those were my favourite books of the year so far. I would love to know in the comments what your favourite books of the year so far have been, and I'd also love to know if you have read any of these and what you think of them. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!